Hi, everyone. Judge Andrew Napolitano here for Judging Freedom. Today is Thursday, December 7th, 2023. Professor Michael Rectenwald, formerly of New York University, now of Hillsdale College, and a candidate for the Libertarian nomination for President of the United States, joins us now. Professor Rectenwald, always a pleasure. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Judge. Great to be here.
Of course. Why does the Congress fund foreign wars and do so with zeal and glee?
I mean, it's just incredible. So right now, Biden's claiming that we need to send $60 billion to Ukraine for national security. Meanwhile, the southern border is wide open. And with Israel producing rage with its murderous campaign in the Gaza Strip, I mean, we have the possibility of terrorists entering the country vastly increased. So it seems to me that there's obviously the fact that the war lobby has a tremendous grip on Congress, and they have lobbied to make sure that wars continue, that we fund wars. Since there is no appetite for U.S. military entering wars, we have found these proxy wars to enter. Thereby enriching the military-industrial complex at the expense of the American public.
So I think you might remember this, and we may have even spoken about it. About a month ago, Senator Richard Blumenthal, liberal Democrat of Connecticut, and Senator Mitt Romney, conservative, in his own words, Republican of Utah, and a former Republican nominee for president, said that the Ukraine war was the best of all worlds. We were getting the biggest bang for our buck, and no American was dying. Did they forget the generation of Ukrainian young men wiped out? According to Colonel Douglas McGregor, 500,000 either killed or so disabled they can't go back to the military.
Yeah, I mean, they've been cynically and immorally feeding these Ukrainians into the maw of death, at the cost of the American taxpayer, and it's just a crime. We have been abetting and aiding this ongoing war, which is getting nowhere, which will end exactly where it started, with the Donbass region being maintained by Putin. There's very little likelihood that that's going to change, and yet they want to continue it. And they have displaced, in addition to 500,000 some troops dying, they have displaced millions of Ukrainians because of this conflict.
And the members of Congress see no harm in this. In fact, as just stated, they see the opposite. They see joy.
Incredible. I mean, so they're really bent on destabilizing and, effectively creating a coup, a regime change in Russia. That's really the ultimate objective. And they really think that they can affect this through this insane funding and arming. But it's not going to lead to that at all. In fact, Putin's position economically and militarily have only been enhanced. This is a fool's errand and a criminal activity. It's incredible that the Congress has no scruples, apparently, about funding this particular campaign.
Of what conceivable national security interest to the United States is Ukraine, or is Israel, for that matter?
Yeah, they have no national security interest. Instead, it's a kind of imperialism interest. That's really all of that is at stake here. And I think that empire is already in tatters. And to try to gain control over Russia is absurd. And what we're doing in Israel by funding and arming the Israelis to the tune of $3.8 billion a year, and now arms deliveries every day, according to White House reports, they're delivering arms every day. And we have now opened up the stockpile that exists in Israel without any kinds of qualifications. They can use whatever arms they want to any end with no red lines on any behavior whatsoever.
I know I opened the door to Israel but I forgot to raise an issue with you on Ukraine, and that is the domino theory propounded by the administration. We're going to run a clip of President Biden. I don't know if he's speaking off the cuff or if he's got a teleprompter. I don't want to criticize him personally, although there's a lot to criticize. But he's making a terrible argument, Professor Rectenwald. He's basically saying, if you don't give me $68 billion now, Putin's not going to stop at Ukraine. He's going to attack a NATO nation, and that's going to produce American troops fighting Russian troops. This is an outrageous threat, but I want your it's about 2 minutes long. I want your thoughts on it.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to speak to you today about an urgent responsibility the Congress has to uphold the national security needs of the United States and, quite frankly, of our partners as well. This cannot wait. Congress needs to pass supplemental funding for Ukraine before they break for the holiday resources. As simple as that. Frankly, I think it's stunning that we've gotten to this point in the first place. While Republicans in Congress are willing to give Putin the greatest gift he could hope for and abandon our global leadership, not just in Ukraine, but beyond that. If Putin takes Ukraine, he won't stop there. It's important to see the long run here. He's going to keep going. He's made that pretty clear. If Putin attacks a NATO ally, then we'll have something that we don't seek and that we don't have today. American troops fighting Russian troops. American troops fighting Russian troops if he moves into other parts of NATO. Extreme Republicans are playing chicken with our national security, holding Ukraine's funding hostage to their extreme partisan border policies. And now they're willing to literally kneecap Ukraine on the battlefield and damage our national security in the process. Look, I know we have our divisions at home. Let's get past them. This is critical. Petty, partisan, angry politics can't get in the way of our responsibility as a leading nation in the world. We can't let Putin win. Say it again, we can't let Putin win. It's in our overwhelming national interest and international interest of all our friends.
I mean, this is shades of LBJ, and if we don't crush North Vietnam, all of Southeast Asia will become communist.
Yeah.
Vietnam, the unified country today, is now one of our most profitable trading partners. The domino theory has never worked. But the aid to Ukraine is being held up for domestic reasons. Interestingly, for the reason that you mentioned a few minutes ago, which is border security. At least that's the stated purpose of the Republicans. Even Lindsey Graham, who never met somebody else's blood that he didn't want to spill, said, "I'm not voting." He's in the Senate. "I'm not voting for this until we build a wall in Texas and Arizona." I'll put aside the issue of freedom of travel and the wall. Do you think that the Congress will come through? Because if they don't come through, the war will have to stop. The war is effectively over. Ukraine has lost, but there's still fighting going on. They have weeks worth of equipment and ammunition we gave them. But if they know at a certain point it's going to stop, January 1st, February 1st, they're going to have to prepare for that.
Oh, I mean, Biden's remarks were premised on lies to start. He's suggesting that Russia will not stop at Ukraine. Meanwhile, there's no threat that Russia is going to take all of Ukraine. That's not even its objective. As a matter of fact, as has been revealed, there was, in fact, a peace negotiation in which Russia effectively said they would stop the war if, in fact, Ukraine promised not to become a NATO partner. So this whole idea that Russia wants to take over other parts of Eastern Europe is insane, and it's a complete lie. It's complete balderdash, and it is ridiculous that the United States Congress is putting as a priority, and I mean the Senate and Congress here, the security of Ukraine while our own border is completely wide open, and they will not. And it's called far right to want to secure that border. That's called a far right wing position. So I guess a non-far right position is just to allow unfettered immigrants, unfettered immigration to pour into the country, and we have no idea whether these people have our best interests at heart at all. They may in fact be terrorists, and thanks to Israel's campaign, that likelihood is increased. So I mean, it's a ball of lies. There's absolutely no truth to what Biden is saying, and it has to be rejected. I hope that this funding to Ukraine ends immediately, because this is a fruitless, absolute fool's errand that we're on here in terms of funding and arming them.
If you had been on the stage of the Republican presidential debate last night, like your predecessor, Congressman Ron Paul, was a number of years ago, you would have been the only one there making this argument. Now, I don't know where Donald Trump stands on Ukraine. I don't know where he stands on Israel. He's probably in favor of giving Israel whatever it wants. At one point, he said we wouldn't give Ukraine a nickel. So hooray for him if he believes we shouldn't give Ukraine a nickel. But those candidates last night are in favor of an $875 billion defense budget, Mike, which is larger, as you know, better than I, than the next 12 nations combined, including Great Britain, Russia, and China.
Yeah, and it's ill spent, as we've seen. With the arms that the U.S. has been sending over to Ukraine, they're unable to actually complete the mission, and part of that has to do with personnel, but a part of it has to do with the fact that weapons are not even adequate. They're not even functional in some cases. So yeah, this is just a complete slush fund for the military-industrial complex, and it's draining the American public. And if the American public had a right to vote on this issue, I guarantee they would vote it down, and they might even vote down funding for an arming of Israel as well, which they should. And I'm the only presidential candidate out there that is opposed to both of these theaters of war, and also the funding of Taiwan in its provocation it's a provocation to China. And effectively, we're trying to patrol the South China Sea, and we're trying to basically, bait China into some sort of a conflict. So all of these are very, very unwitting and very, very dangerous propositions.
Moving back to Israel, does the Netanyahu government consider unarmed women and children to be civilians, or does it consider every human being? This is some crazy rationalization if they do, but do they consider every human being of Palestinian descent or nationality, I guess I should say, in Gaza to be a combatant?
Well, if we take the rhetoric coming out of Likud party and the Knesset and Netanyahu himself, there's a suggestion that they consider every Gazan person to be an enemy who can and should be obliterated. They use the phrase, and not Netanyahu himself, used the biblical term Amalek to refer to the Palestinian peoples. Now, in the Old Testament, there is a sanction, a green light given to the Israelites to utterly destroy Amalek, woman, child, and even pregnant women, basically wipe out the population. So they're using rhetoric like that. And then, of course, their actions are very indicative of the fact that they have no regard for civilian life. They tell people to migrate to the South while they bomb the South. They get to the South and they bomb them there. They're bombing hospitals, ambulances, schools, mosques, churches, etc. It's absolutely an indiscriminate campaign of slaughter. And anybody that can sit by watching this happen without feeling extreme nausea and a terrible sense of regret and shame in the fact that the United States of America is funding this unbelievable conquest of a civilian population is just beyond me.
Here's Admiral Kirby claiming that there are safe zones and there actually is a map of safe zones. I'll be anxious to hear, cut one, Chris. I'll be anxious to hear your thoughts on this.
Let's talk about this map that you have referenced, the fact that Israel has said these specific places are safe zones. Obviously, civilians were already told to evacuate from the north. There's a sense that these civilians don't have a place to go. A UNICEF spokesperson tells the Washington Post, quote, "There is nowhere to move to. Nowhere is safe in Gaza." What is your response to him and others?
Well, we understand the anxiety and the fear there. I mean, not only are there still a lot of civilians in southern Gaza, there are more civilians in southern Gaza because the Israelis accounted for humanitarian corridors to get hundreds of thousands. So we're estimating more than about 1 million. So that's roughly half the population of Gaza before the war is now internally displaced. That's a lot of people. And so we understand the concerns by the UN and by other non-governmental humanitarian organizations in there. That's why, again, we're working with our Israeli counterparts to do everything they can to provide these areas where people can go and feel a sense of safety. And again, they did put some information out in the last 24, 48 hours to articulate those kinds of areas. That's a step in the right direction.
Man, that is just not believable. They cut off food, water, and fuel to these poor people. They told them to go to a certain area, and then they bombed the area to which they told them to go.
Yeah, they have them running back and forth between various supposed sanctuaries, and then they bomb the sanctuary that they're told to go to. This is just unconscionable. I think that the civilized world is watching one of the most horrific mass slaughters of civilians in history, at least on television. This is just unbelievable.
You and I, and a lot of people watching us now, believe in natural rights, that our rights come from our humanity, whether you believe in an almighty, all-knowing, all-loving God, or whether you think that human beings are the highest rational beings on the planet. We accept the view that our rights come from our humanity, and as Jefferson called them, they're inalienable. What is the moral dimension to this slaughter? What is the moral, the natural law analysis or understanding of this kind of slaughter? We know that international law is virtually meaningless. Governments prosecute whoever they want, usually some demon that they manage to sweep up. It's hard for me to believe that Joe Biden, who's facilitating a war crime, Tony Blinken, who's facilitating a war crime, Bibi Netanyahu, who's ordering war crimes, it's hard for me to believe that they'll ever be prosecuted. But what is the moral dimension here, Professor Rectenwald?
Well, there's natural rights law, but also from the libertarian perspective, there's something called the non-aggression principle. And that is that you are not to initiate force against another person on your own without it being a defensive action. Now, in the case of civilians, in the case of war in general, I would argue, it's impossible not to violate the non-aggression principle because always there's this so-called collateral damage with war. And we have a case where there's millions of people in Gaza that haven't done anything. They haven't initiated any violence against anyone, and yet they're being killed and maimed and displaced and their property utterly destroyed. This is a clear violation of the non-aggression principle. And this is why the parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, can't come down on any two issues in the same way because they have no principles from which to operate. And so I argue that the principle that we should operate from is the non-aggression principle. Unless it's a defensive move, unless you're defending yourself, your person and your property, you have no right to initiate force against anyone. And that's what's happening in Gaza. That's what's happening in the West Bank as well. And that's why, the lack of this principle is why you have both Republicans and Democrats solidly behind this slaughter, with a few exceptions.
Here's Vice President Harris, cut 8, Chris, last week in Dubai, using some very, very unfortunate language. I'm sure you'll agree with me.
President Biden and I have also been clear with the Israeli government, in public and in private, many times. As Israel defends itself, it matters how. The United States is unequivocal. International humanitarian law must be respected. Too many innocent Palestinians have been killed.
It matters how. They're using American bombs and American artillery shells to kill. Too many Palestinians have been killed. Well, how many is too many, Vice President Harris? I don't mean to steal your thunder, Mike.
No, absolutely. You're right on. So the point that she says that too many innocent Palestinians have died. Actually, one innocent Palestinian death is too many, because anybody that's innocent should not be killed. Now, in the case of Israel, they did have a right to self-defense, but really, history didn't begin on October 7th, as we all know. So this is an ongoing onslaught that has been taking place for years, decades. And likewise, we can't just suggest that Israel has a green light. And if they kill like 5,000, I guess that's plenty enough. That's fine. But 10, 15, I guess that's too much. It's an outrage to even talk in these kinds of terms. And more importantly, it's an outrage to be sending arms and funds at the very moment in which this kind of extermination is underway.
Do you expect to be on the national stage in the fall of 24? Do you expect to be making these arguments everywhere? Do you expect to be on every state ballot in the union?
Absolutely. I expect to be on the ballot. There may be a couple exceptions like New York because of their treachery in terms of ballot access. But we're going to be on at least 48 ballots. And I will promise this, and I'm not a politician, so please bear with me. I will say the same kinds of things that I'm saying right now on the national stage. I will not change a thing. I will not at all equivocate or bow down to any particular forces or funds or anything else. And I will not change the message. The message will stay the same on the national stage. And that's why I need to get there. I need to get to the national stage because we need this message out there. We need to fight this tyranny.
Professor Michael Rectenwald seeking the Libertarian nomination for the presidency of the United States. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Judge.
Of course. Scott Ritter from antiwar.com, 3 o'clock Eastern coming up. Judge Napolitano for Judging Freedom.